You are welcome to this session on the Business Agility series. Today I'm sitting in for William, who is usually our host for this session. I'll be speaking on iteration for improvement, focusing on the Agile Scrum framework, but still in line with the SAFe framework. Yeah. So William has been talking about the Agile methodologies. He mentioned Scrum, Kanban, DevOps, XP, SAFe, Scrum at Scale, and all of them. And from the previous sessions, he made us aware that some of these methodologies are good or appropriate for teams, some are appropriate for large organizations. I would be taking one of the methodologies for the teams, that is the Scrum, focusing on small teams or smaller teams. So this is just a general framework of the Scrum. One big thing or one main thing about the Scrum is the iteration. So it starts from the product backlog, where you have the features that you want to implement. Those features are broken down into user stories. So you take one of the features and break it down into the user stories and get the team backlog. Then you now start the iteration process. Usually the iteration process will take maybe 2 to 4 weeks, but that would depend mainly on the business context or the scope of the system that you are developing. So within these 2 to 4 weeks, some people do 1 week iteration anyway. So within this 2 to 4 weeks iteration, there's a daily stand-up every 24 hours. Some people use 30 minutes, some people use 15 minutes. After each iteration, one major feature or one major characteristic of the Scrum framework is that you need to come up with a minimum viable product. And the minimum viable product should be something that could be used by the user or the customer. Okay. So I'm going to focus more on the iterations. The iterations are the basic building block of Agile development. So every Agile development thrives on iterations. It's usually a standard fixed length time box. SAFe recommends 2 weeks of the iteration. Sometimes they allow people to do 1 to 4 weeks, as I said earlier on, based on the scope or the business context that is involved. After every iteration, the team should deliver incremental value. Now, this incremental value, which we normally call the minimum viable product, should be a working tested system or a product, something that could be beneficial or the user or the customer could start using. Every Agile development goes through this iteration process. It might not be the same way, but the iteration should be there. If there's a system being built and it gets finished within 1 iteration, would you classify that as Agile? Most people think that cannot be considered Agile, because in Agile, you need to break it down into several iterations. The iterations help in improving the system or the product that you are going to deliver at the final stage. So if you are going to just use one iteration to get to the end, then it becomes a bit like waterfall. Yeah. Talking about iterations, then we talk about the time boxing. We say it's putting strict time boundaries around an activity. So with the iterations, you need to have time box for all the activities that you'll be doing. The daily stand-up, the whole iteration process. Why do we need that? We said that it helps to ensure that the meeting will begin and end on time with no exceptions. There's normally that natural tendency to focus on the most important things first because of the time limits that you are in. So if you set that time limit, you're able to complete things earlier. And this the time boxing also helps you to expect that that absolutely required content be completed before the end of the meeting. Because here you know that, so for instance, in the meeting, you know you are going to spend only 30 minutes for your meeting. You'd make sure that you tackle all the essential issues before the 30 minutes elapses. Any other issue that comes up will be pushed to the next meeting. So time boxing becomes a constraint that is used by teams to help focus on value. Now, because you have a limited time, the whole team tries to work within the time frame that is allowed. You don't go beyond it. If anything comes up during the meeting that is worth considering, normally it's pushed to the next iteration. So time boxing is one essential feature of the Scrum framework and the iteration process. Now let me mention the roles in the Scrum environment, roles that you might be very familiar with. We have the product owner, the Scrum master, and the Agile team. So the product owner is responsible for defining the stories that were called out of the features. So the stories and prioritizing the team backlog. They also ensure that the stories meet the user's needs. That is the product owner. Then we have the Scrum Master. So the product owner here becomes like the interface for the customer. So they try to speak or they try to represent the customer within the Scrum team. The Scrum Master is the servant leader and coach for an Agile team. So they ensure that the agreed Agile process is being followed. And if there are any impediments, the Scrum Master tries to remove these impediments. In a normal project sense, the Scrum Master would be considered like the project manager. But here, he doesn't play that role or the traditional role of the project manager. He guides the team on what to do to follow the Agile process. If there are any impediments, they try to get it resolved. So he's more of a facilitator and a coach for the team. Then we come to the Agile team itself. Originally, they were mainly referred to as the development team or the developers, but we said that this team now goes beyond just the developers. It's a cross-functional group normally making up of 5 to 11 individuals. They define, they build, they test, and deliver value. It's made up of a technical and a business team. Now, it's very important to limit this Agile team to a small section, maybe like 5, 6, rather than 10 and 11 members, because when you have a smaller group, it increases the efficiency of communication among the team members. The team members can communicate among themselves better in a smaller group. Yeah. So the Agile team, everybody brings their own experience and collaboration on board, and they work to deliver value. That is the Agile team. SAFe has the PDA learning cycle. That is the plan, do, PDCA learning cycle. That is the plan, do, check, adjust. They try to link this PDCA to the events. So on the first event, we have the iteration planning. During this, you plan the activities that you are going to do during the iteration process and all of that. So normally you do that and you get your user stories, your backlog and all of that. Then you move on to the execution where you perform the activities. Now, during the iteration execution, that is when the team members develop the system or they develop solution to whatever problem that they're trying to address. After the execution, we go to the iteration review. During the review, the system is demonstrated to all the relevant stakeholders to give their comments. So you check what you've done based on what the users were expecting to see if the product or the solution that you are delivering to the user is what they were expecting here. After iteration review, the last stage is the iteration retrospective. With the iteration retrospective, you try to look back at all the things that you didn't do well, the things that could be improved in the previous iteration. You look at ways to improve them, then you move on to start a new iteration. So at the retrospective stage, you consider all the items that probably you couldn't tackle during the previous iteration. You look at how to fit them into the next iteration process. You look at how to tackle all the activities during the next iteration before you go into the next iteration planning process. And SAFE recommends this learning cycle because the more you go through the cycle, the better the team bonds together. They become consistent in what they are doing. Now we are trying to talk about the iteration process. It's very relevant within the Scrum framework. One of the most important things about the iteration is when the MVP is delivered. After every iteration process, the minimum viable product is delivered to the user. Why do we need to do that? We do that to collect feedback from the users early on. This would ensure that there's a good product fit with the user. It's very important to deliver the MVP to the user to get the feedback to work on your system. This would ensure that you get better quality with your system. The more you get feedback from the users, the better you develop your system to meet the needs of the customer or the user, which will lead to more sales, increased pricing, reducing, and it reduces support cost also. But one of the most important feature about iteration is it improves the process with every iteration. So after the first iteration, you go back to the next one, you start the process again, you realize that some of the things that we are not doing well, in the next iteration, you can do them better. So that iteration, that repetition brings a lot of improvement in the whole process. You're able to do things better. You're able to better meet the needs of the users. The team bonds better also. So apart from delivering an MVP to the user, one of the things that helps the team during this or during the iteration process is improving on the development process itself. So the team at Late have been working on a system. They've been developing a system at Late that I would want to explain briefly what happens there. So they first start, I'm part of the team, so I would use we. So we first start with the product backlog. We look at the features that we want to implement in the system, and we take one feature and we would decide to tackle that feature. And we go through the team building. Based on the feature, we look at which people do we need for that, to execute or to develop that feature. Because sometimes in some of the features, you might need maybe the UX and the UX designer, maybe you might need a programmer. In some other features, you might not need them, so you could look at all of that. Then we develop all the conceptual diagrams, the UML diagrams, the ERD diagrams, the data flow diagrams, all of those concepts are developed. Then we come up with the user stories based on the feature that has been selected from the product backlog. So that forms the team backlog. Then we start the iteration process. Typically, we use the 2-week iteration. So at the end of the 2 weeks, we expect that we should come up with an MVP. During these 2 weeks, we have a daily stand-up of 15 minutes where the team members present what they've done the previous day, what they would want to do on the next day as in the day. Then they look at, well, if there are any impediments, anything that was hindering their work from the previous day, we consider that and try to address all of that. But we try to maintain that 15 minutes so that we don't go beyond. That time boxing is very important. There are times that some issues will need further deliberation. So that could come up after the 15 minutes. So if a developer needs to meet another member of the team to discuss something, they stay behind and to talk about it or to discuss whatever new things that need to come up in the system. But we try to maintain that 15-minute daily standard. Then we develop the products or the MVP. We need to do a demo to the users or the stakeholders. So they look at it, we do a review of the whole process in the iteration review, where we look at what we've done so far and what needs to be pushed into the next iteration. We look at, then at the retrospective stage, we look at how the whole process went, what we didn't do well, what needs to improve at the next stage. We look at all of that and go into the next iteration. So at the next iteration, we go back to the product backlog, the product backlog, consider which feature we are going to take. If there are any features from the previous iteration, we consider them and include them. We develop the user stories, then the process goes on like that. So this is basically how the Scrum session works. Okay, before I end the session, there's one quote from Tom Daly. Tom Daly is an English diver, and he's been named about 3 or 4 times the BBC Young Sports Personality. And he said that, I think the real reason for my improvement is because I had such a long period in the off-season, just working as hard as I could on all my new dives, making sure I did lots of repetition to get them consistent. So here we are talking about repetition. And this is what links up to the iteration process. The repetition makes you consistent and it helps you in the improvement process. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, if it is the right thing you're doing, okay, even if it's not the right thing, you would become better at it. So when you're doing the right thing over and over again, you always become better at it. And it improves the quality of the work you are doing and improves the process that you're using to develop that quality product as well. So all that we are saying is that we iterate to improve in an Agile Scrum environment. Thank you very much. I will take some questions now or any discussion or any feedback on this session. So if you have any question or discussion, you could just unmute yourself or post the question into the chat, then we look at it.
Hi, Carlos.
Hi.
My question is not so much a question as an observation. I'm looking at your development system at LIT. You said that what you look at the product backlog, then you build your team based on the product, based on the what you have in the product backlog. You build your team. So it means that sometimes you could even have a different, not necessarily developers in the team. It changes depending on what you have in the product backlog. Because traditionally people think.
Can you please speak up a little bit? I can hardly hear you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm just looking at your life cycle here, where you say where you work currently. You look at the product backlog to develop your team, to build your team. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. Does that mean that depending on what you have in your product backlog, you could have different types of people performing acts during the sprint? So you could have business analysts within your team. Should that be something that you need? Is that the case?
Okay, I get your question. No, there's the core Agile team that we have that would go through all the iteration processes. So for every iteration, that core team is there. Sometimes we have this support team that comes in to help us in what we do. So based on the product or the feature that we are working on, then we call on the other teams and the support team to come in to help us. But there's that core team that goes through the whole process. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay, any more questions? If there's none, then I think we'll end our session a bit earlier today.
Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you very much, and see you.
Thank you.
I think on Thursday we have
Friday?
the hello.
I thought it was Friday.
No, Friday. I'm done with the
that's the last
data
one.
session. I'm done with it. So on Thursday we'll start a new session with Shelley. Shelley will be doing the Agile coaching series. Shelley will be starting the Agile coaching series on Thursdays. So now we'll be having Thursday sessions for Agile coaching. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Carlos. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Bye.
Okay, there's a question. Demola says, the duties of a PO is similar to a BA. So what's the difference? Okay, so the PO here, is Demola on? Here he is. The PO, the product owner, is more like behaving like the customer. So he is there to give out the stories, what needs to be worked on, what becomes the view. There are similarities and overlaps between in their roles as the BA. But the thing is that in the Agile team, the BA is more like with the Agile team itself, because they go through the main development process. But we don't classify anybody as a BA within the Agile team. Everybody works together. They work with the developers and the testers and everything. But the PO would now be the customer. So the PO now comes to review the system, look at the demo that is being presented and give the comments on during the demo. Then it now goes into the next iteration process. Yeah. Demola, I don't know if I've answered your question. Phil, yes, there'll be the recording. We'll put it on YouTube. The video will be shared on YouTube. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and see you on Thursday, God willing.